The tears blurred Bethany Forrester's vision as she stumbled down the courthouse steps, the divorce papers clutched in her trembling hand like a death sentence. Denver, Colorado Territory, 1875, what had once been the start of a promising new life on the frontier, had become her personal hell. Her husband Thomas had been granted their ranch, their savings, and even her family heirlooms, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a broken heart. "Bethany," Thomas's voice called from behind her, full of that false concern he'd perfected for public display. "Don't make a scene." "You brought this on yourself." Bethany quickened her pace, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her completely shatter. 6 years of marriage had taught her that his charm was reserved for others, while behind closed doors lived a jealous, controlling man whose gambling had ruined them both. The judge hadn't believed her claims, swayed by Thomas's standing in the community and the witnesses he'd paid to testify to her supposed infidelity. The busy street before her blurred as tears streamed down her face. She had no destination, no plan. At 24, she was alone in a frontier town with no family, no money, and a reputation in tatters. The sound of hooves clacking against packed earth drew closer as she reached the bottom step. A magnificent chestnut stallion came to a stop beside her, its rider casting a long shadow across her tear-stained face. "Miss, are you all right?" The man's voice was deep, gentle, the kind that might calm spooked horses. Bethany looked up, shielding her eyes from the afternoon sun. Atop the horse sat a tall figure, broad-shouldered and solid, with a weathered cowboy hat pulled low over his eyes. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice betrayed her. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing his full height. He wasn't dressed like the townsman, no fancy suit or polished shoes. Instead, he wore practical riding clothes, dusty from the trail, with worn leather chaps and a simple cotton shirt. His face, partially hidden beneath several days' worth of beard, showed concern rather than judgment. "You don't look fine," he said plainly, keeping a respectful distance. "I don't mean to pry, but I recognize those papers." He nodded toward the divorce decree in her hand. "Saw my sister go through the same thing 2 years back." Bethany hastily wiped at her tears with her free hand. "I don't need charity." "Didn't offer any," he replied, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But you look like you could use a friend, or at least a place to catch your breath." When Bethany said nothing, he continued, "Name's Kieran Pratt. I've got a small spread about half a day's ride from here. It ain't much, but there's honest work if you want it, and my sister Emma could use the help. She's running the place while I'm in town picking up supplies." "You'd offer that to a stranger?" Bethany asked suspiciously. "Emma would have my hide if I left a woman alone and crying on the courthouse steps." His expression turned serious. "Look, I don't know your story and you don't have to tell it, but if you need somewhere to go, come home with me, at least until you figure out your next move." Something about his straightforward manner broke through Bethany's defenses. She'd learned to be wary of men offering help. It usually came with expectations, but the cowboy's eyes held no hidden agenda she could detect. "I don't even know you," she said, though with less conviction. "No, you don't," he agreed. "But sometimes strangers are safer than the people we thought we knew." The painful truth of his words struck Bethany like a physical blow. Behind her lay the courthouse where her husband of 6 years had systematically dismantled her life with practiced lies. Ahead of her stretched a future of uncertainty. "I'm Bethany Forrester," she finally said, extending her hand. Kieran took it briefly, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Forrester." "It's Mrs." she began automatically, then stopped, glancing down at the papers. "No." "I suppose it's Miss Forrester now." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've got one more stop to make at the general store. Would give you time to gather any belongings you need." Reality crashed down on Bethany again. "I have nothing to gather. Everything I owned is now his." She gestured bitterly toward the courthouse. The judge was thorough in his ruling. A muscle tightened in Kieran's jaw, but he said nothing about the injustice. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small pouch. "Emma packed some extra biscuits this morning. Might not be much, but it'll hold you over till supper." The simple kindness nearly undid Bethany completely. She accepted the food with a murmured thanks, realizing she hadn't eaten since the previous evening, too nervous about the court proceedings to manage breakfast. "Wait here while I finish my business," Kieran said, securing his horse to a nearby post. Unless you've changed your mind, Bethany looked around at the bustling town that had become a prison of memories. What choice did she have? Pride wouldn't put a roof over her head or food in her belly. "I'll wait," she decided. Kieran nodded and strode toward the general store, his spurs jingling slightly with each step. Bethany settled on a bench outside the mercantile, numbly watching townspeople pass by. Some averted their eyes, while others stared openly. News traveled fast in Denver, and her divorce had been the talk of the town for weeks. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Montgomery, or should I say Miss Forrester now, Bethany's stomach clenched at the sound of Harriet Wilkes's voice. The banker's wife had always despised her, especially after Thomas had begun doing business with her husband. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Wilkes," Bethany replied stiffly. "Such a shame about your situation," Harriet continued, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "Though Thomas always was too good for you. A man in his position needs a proper wife, not some farmer's daughter playing at society." Bethany bit her tongue. Responding would only fuel the gossip further. "I hear he's already calling on Miss Sullivan," Harriet added with malicious delight. "Her father's connections will certainly serve him better than your modest background." Before Bethany could respond, a shadow fell across them both. "Afternoon, madam," Kieran said, his voice polite but cool as he addressed Harriet. "I believe my companion and I need to be on our way." Harriet's eyes widened as she took in Kieran's rugged appearance. "Your companion? My, that didn't take long, did it?" Her gaze slid back to Bethany with new understanding. Perhaps Thomas's accusations weren't so false after all. "Mrs. Wilkes," Kieran said, stepping slightly in front of Bethany. "In my experience, folks who spend their time judging others rarely have time to notice their own shortcomings. Like a husband who frequents the saloon on Cedar Street every Thursday while claiming to be at business meetings." Harriet's face blanched. "How dare you insinuate?" "I don't insinuate, madam, just making conversation, same as you." Kieran tipped his hat. "Good day to you." He turned to Bethany, offering his arm. "Ready to go, Miss Forrester." Bethany stood, ignoring Harriet's stunned expression as she took Kieran's arm. "More than ready, Mr. Pratt." They walked to his horse in silence, Bethany's heart pounding with a mixture of humiliation and grudging gratitude. "How did you know about Mr. Wilkes?" she asked once they were out of earshot. A faint smile crossed Kieran's face. "I didn't. But men like him are predictable, and the look on her face told me I hit close enough to the mark." For the first time that day, Bethany felt a flicker of amusement. "That was unkind of you, Mr. Pratt." "Probably," he agreed, securing his purchases to the saddle, "but so was she." Kieran helped Bethany mount first before swinging up behind her. The intimacy of the arrangement made her tense, but there was nothing improper in the way he kept a respectful distance between their bodies, his arms reaching around her only to hold the reins. As they rode out of Denver, Bethany felt the weight of staring eyes following them. Her reputation, already in tatters, would be completely destroyed by this departure with a strange man. Yet oddly, she found she cared less with each hoofbeat that carried her away from her old life. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, needing conversation to distract her from her thoughts. "It's small compared to some," Kieran replied. 200 acres, mostly for cattle. Got a decent-sized cabin with a separate room Emma uses. There's a small bunkhouse for the 2 hands I hire during roundup, but they're gone till spring. Just you and your sister. And about 60 head of cattle, 4 horses, some chickens, and a mighty unfriendly cat Emma insisted on keeping." The normalcy of his description soothed Bethany's frayed nerves. As they left the outskirts of Denver behind, the open landscape of the Colorado Territory spread before them, rolling hills, stands of pine trees, and in the distance, the majestic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. "It's beautiful out here," Bethany murmured. "Gets in your blood," Kieran agreed. "Different kind of life than town, harder in some ways, simpler in others." They rode in companionable silence after that, the rhythmic movement of the horse lulling Bethany into a state of exhausted calm. The events of the day, the sleepless nights leading up to it, and the emotional toll of the past months caught up with her all at once. Kieran noticed when her posture began to slump. "There's a creek up ahead. We'll stop there, rest a bit." Bethany wanted to protest that she was fine, but the truth was she wasn't. When they reached the creek, Kieran dismounted first, then helped her down. Her legs felt wobbly beneath her, unaccustomed to riding. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a fallen log. "Drink some water." While she did as he suggested, Kieran led his horse to the water's edge, removing the bridle so the animal could drink freely. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who had spent his life working with animals. "How long have you had your ranch?" Bethany asked. "Going on 5 years now," he replied, checking the horse's hooves methodically. "Worked as a ranch hand since I was 16, saved every penny. Emma and I came out from Illinois after our parents died, wanted a fresh start." "I'm sorry about your parents," Kieran nodded his thanks. "Been just the two of us since I was 22. Emma was 18, she's 23 now, about your age I'd guess." "I'm 24, Bethany confirmed. "How'd you end up in Denver?" he asked, though his tone made it clear she didn't need to answer if she preferred not to. Bethany sighed. In a strange way, it felt easier to talk to this stranger than it had been to explain herself to people she'd known for years. "I came from Missouri with my husband Thomas 6 years ago. He had grand plans for making his fortune in the West." She let out a bitter laugh. "And he did for a while. Until his gambling caught up with him. He was good at hiding it from everyone but me." Kieran said nothing, giving her space to continue if she wished. "When things went bad, he needed someone to blame. I was convenient." She looked down at her hands. The judge believed him. Everyone did. "Thomas has always been persuasive." "Some men are skilled liars," Kieran said simply, returning to sit a respectful distance from her on the log. "Doesn't make it your fault." The straightforward statement, free of pity or judgment, loosened something in Bethany's chest. She'd spent so long being told everything was her failure, her barrenness, her inadequacy as a wife, her inability to please Thomas, that hearing someone suggest otherwise felt revolutionary. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. Kieran merely nodded, offering her a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. "We should get going soon if we want to reach the ranch before dark." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they moved away from Denver. Bethany found herself growing more comfortable with both the riding and with Kieran's solid presence behind her. He wasn't a talkative man, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and direct. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they crested a small rise, and Kieran pulled the horse to a stop. "There it is," he said. "Pratt Ranch." Below them stretched a modest but well-kept property. The main cabin was larger than Bethany had expected, with smoke curling from the chimney. A barn stood nearby, along with corrals and a small chicken coop. Several cattle grazed in the distance, and a fenced vegetable garden was visible beside the house. "It's lovely," Bethany said sincerely. Pride colored Kieran's voice as he urged the horse forward. "It's home." As they approached, the cabin door swung open and a young woman emerged, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "You're late," she called. "I was about to send out a search party. Had an unexpected delay," Kieran replied as they reached the yard. He dismounted first, then helped Bethany down. Up close, she could see the family resemblance between the siblings, the same determined jaw, the same direct gaze, though Emma's eyes were a lighter blue than her brother's deep brown. "Emma, this is Miss Bethany Forrester. She'll be staying with us for a while. Miss Forrester, my sister Emma." Emma's surprise was evident, but she recovered quickly, offering Bethany a warm smile. "Well, this is unexpected, but you're welcome all the same. Come inside, you look like you could use a hot meal and maybe something stronger." Bethany hesitated, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd done, leaving everything behind to come to a strange place with people she didn't know. Kieran seemed to sense her uncertainty. "No obligations, Miss Forrester. You're free to leave whenever you choose. But for tonight, at least, you have a roof and a meal." His matter-of-fact tone steadied her. This wasn't charity, it was simply human decency, something she'd seen precious little of lately. "Thank you," she said, following Emma toward the cabin while Kieran led his horse toward the barn. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable-looking furniture arranged before it. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with doors leading off to what Bethany assumed were bedrooms. Everything was clean and well-ordered, if simple. "I hope my brother explained our situation," Emma said, taking Bethany's shawl. "It's just the two of us most of the time, so you'll have to forgive us if we're a bit rough around the edges." "He said you might need help around the place," Bethany replied. Emma's laugh was warm and genuine. "Did he now?" "Well, he's not wrong. Running a ranch is no small task, especially with Kieran gone so often on cattle business." She gestured for Bethany to sit at the sturdy wooden table while she stirred something savory smelling in a pot hanging over the fire. "Kieran told me a little about your circumstances," Emma continued, her tone gentle. "Just enough that I understand today's been difficult." "You don't need to explain anything more than you're comfortable sharing." Relief flooded through Bethany. "Thank you for that kindness." Emma waved away her gratitude. "We've all got stories, some harder than others. Out here, it's what you do going forward that matters more than what's behind you." The door opened, and Kieran entered, bringing with him the scent of horses and fresh air. He'd removed his hat and chaps and washed his face and hands from the look of it. "Stew smells good, Emma," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "It had better." "I've been cooking it since noon," she replied good-naturedly. "Get the biscuits from the warming oven, would you?" The domestic scene unfolding before Bethany struck her with a pang of longing. How long had it been since she'd experienced a peaceful home? Thomas had once been charming and attentive, but that facade had crumbled within months of their marriage, revealing a man consumed by ambition and prone to dark moods. The meal was simple but delicious, a hearty beef stew with vegetables from the garden, fresh biscuits, and apple preserves. Emma kept the conversation light, telling stories about local happenings and asking Bethany neutral questions about her interests rather than her past. "You mentioned needing help," Bethany said as they finished eating. "I'm not experienced with ranch work, but I'm willing to learn. I can cook, and I kept a garden in Denver." "That's more than enough," Emma assured her. "And I can teach you anything else you need to know. Kieran handles most of the heavy ranch work and the business side of things." "Speaking of which," Kieran said, rising from the table, "I need to check on that new calf before turning in." "Emma, can you get Miss Forrester settled?" After he left, Emma showed Bethany to a small room off the main area. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's clean. We use it for storage mostly, but there's a proper bed." "It's perfect," Bethany said sincerely. After the day she'd had, any private space to collect herself felt like luxury. Emma provided a nightgown and some basic toiletries. "These should do until we can figure out something more permanent. We're about the same size, so you're welcome to borrow my clothes until you can get your own." Once alone, Bethany sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day finally catching up to her completely. She allowed herself to cry, then not the public tears of humiliation she'd shed at the courthouse, but deep, cleansing sobs that left her exhausted, but somehow lighter. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sounds of quiet movement in the kitchen. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the previous day's events came rushing back, and with them, a curious sense of relief. She was free of Thomas. Despite everything she'd lost, that simple fact felt like a gift. Dressing in the clothes Emma had provided, Bethany ventured into the main room. Emma was alone at the stove, stirring a pot of porridge. "Good morning," Bethany said tentatively. Emma turned with a smile. "There you are. I was beginning to think you might sleep the day away, though heaven knows you probably needed it." "What time is it?" "Almost 8. Kieran's been up since dawn, checking the herd. He'll be back for breakfast soon." She poured Bethany a cup of coffee. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Better than I expected," Bethany admitted. "May I help with something? You could set the table if you like. Plates are in that cupboard." They worked together companionably, and by the time Kieran returned, breakfast was ready. He greeted them both with a nod, washing up at the basin by the door before joining them at the table. "Sleep well?" he asked Bethany. "Yes, thank you, and thank you both again for your hospitality." "Speaking of which," Emma said, serving the porridge, "we should discuss arrangements." Kieran mentioned you might stay and help around the place. Bethany nodded cautiously. If that's still agreeable to you both. More than agreeable, Emma assured her. We can offer room and board plus $2 a week. It's not much, I know, but it's very fair, Bethany interrupted, genuinely surprised at the generosity. In her experience, people rarely paid women fairly for their labor, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Good, that's settled then, Kieran said with his characteristic directness. Emma can show you the ropes today. I've got to ride out to check the north pasture fence. After breakfast, Kieran departed, and Emma gave Bethany a tour of the property, explaining the daily routines and responsibilities they would share. The work would be hard, Bethany knew, but it was honest work, and for the first time in years, she felt a spark of hope for her future. Days turned into weeks as Bethany settled into life at the Pratt Ranch. The rhythm of ranch life suited her up with the sun, tending to morning chores, then focusing on the day's larger tasks. She learned to collect eggs without being pecked, to weed the garden efficiently, and even to milk the cow Emma had recently purchased. Emma proved to be not just an employer, but a friend, the first real female friend Bethany had had since coming west. They shared stories in the evenings, though Bethany was still reticent about the details of her marriage. Emma never pushed, seeming to understand that some wounds needed time to heal before they could be examined. Kieran was often busy with ranch work, sometimes gone for days checking on distant parts of his land or handling business in neighboring towns. When he was present, he was polite but reserved with Bethany. She sensed it wasn't personal. He seemed to be a naturally private man, comfortable with silence in a way few people were. Yet Bethany found herself increasingly aware of his presence. She noticed things: the careful way he treated animals, the respect he showed his sister, the quiet competence with which he handled every task. Unlike Thomas, who had demanded constant attention and praise, Kieran simply did what needed doing without fuss or expectation of recognition. One evening, about a month after Bethany's arrival, Emma announced she needed to visit a friend who had just had a baby. "I'll be gone 2 or 3 days," she explained at dinner. "Mrs. Peterson needs help with the other children while she recovers. You two will manage all right without me." Bethany felt a flutter of nervousness at the thought of being alone with Kieran, though she couldn't quite explain why. "We'll be fine," Kieran assured his sister. "Nothing we can't handle." The first day of Emma's absence passed uneventfully. Bethany and Kieran worked separately most of the day, coming together only for meals, which were quiet affairs without Emma's talkative presence. On the second day, a summer storm blew in unexpectedly, bringing with it driving rain and fierce winds. Kieran returned from checking the cattle, soaked to the skin and concerned. "The creek's rising fast," he told Bethany as he shed his dripping coat. "If it keeps up, we might have trouble with the lower pasture." Bethany handed him a towel. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Kieran considered her question seriously rather than dismissing it, as Thomas would have done. "If you're not afraid of getting wet, an extra set of hands would be useful. We need to move some hay bales to higher ground before they are ruined." They worked together through the afternoon, rain pelting them as they struggled to save what they could. Bethany's muscles ached with the unfamiliar labor, but she felt a strange satisfaction in the work. Kieran never complained about her slower pace or lesser strength, simply adjusted his expectations and showed her the most efficient ways to help. By evening, they were both exhausted and drenched despite their rain gear. The cabin felt particularly welcoming as they stumbled inside, the fire Emma had banked that morning still providing warmth. "You should change first," Kieran said, gesturing toward her room. "I'll add wood to the fire." When Bethany emerged in dry clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders, Kieran had the fire blazing and was setting a kettle for coffee. "Your turn," she said. "I'll make something to eat." While he changed, Bethany assessed their options. The storm had come on so suddenly they hadn't prepared much, but she found eggs and some leftover bread, enough to make a simple meal. Kieran returned wearing dry clothes, his damp hair slicked back from his face, making him look younger somehow. "Just breakfast for dinner, I'm afraid," Bethany apologized, setting plates on the table. "Looks perfect to me," he said, surprising her with a rare smile that transformed his usually serious face. They ate in companionable silence, the sound of rain on the roof creating a cozy atmosphere. When they finished, Kieran helped her clear the dishes, something Thomas had never once done in their entire marriage. "Thank you for your help today," he said as they worked. Not everyone would have been willing to spend hours in the rain moving hay bales. "I'm glad I could help," Bethany replied honestly. "It feels good to be useful." Kieran looked at her thoughtfully. "You are useful. More than that, you've brought something to this place that was missing." The unexpected compliment flustered Bethany. "I've done nothing special." "Emma smiles more since you came," he said simply. "She was lonely here, though she'd never admit it. Having another woman around has been good for her." "And for you?" The question slipped out before Bethany could reconsider it. Kieran set down the dish he was drying, his expression unreadable. "For me too," he said quietly. "It's been nice having you here, Bethany." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I should check that the windows are secure," he said abruptly, breaking the moment. Storms getting stronger. Left alone, Bethany pressed a hand to her cheek, surprised to find it warm. Was she developing feelings for Kieran? The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. After Thomas, she'd promised herself she wouldn't be fooled again, yet Kieran was nothing like Thomas. Where Thomas had been all charm and grand promises, Kieran was steadfast and honest. Where Thomas had demanded constant attention, Kieran seemed content to exist quietly alongside others. The storm intensified overnight, the wind howling around the cabin like a living thing. Bethany lay awake, listening to the rain lashing against the windows, wondering if the creek would flood. Eventually, she dozed off, only to be awakened by a tremendous crash. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding. Another crash followed, and she heard Kieran moving in the main room. Grabbing her shawl, she hurried out to find him at the door, peering into the darkness. "What happened?" she asked, voice tight with alarm. "Tree came down," he replied, grabbing his coat. "Hit the corner of the barn. I need to check the animals." "I'm coming with you," Bethany said, already reaching for her boots. Kieran looked like he might argue, then nodded. "Stay close." The wind nearly knocked them over as they stepped outside. Rain stung Bethany's face as they made their way to the barn, where a large pine had indeed crashed through one corner of the roof. Inside, the horses were nervous but unharmed. The damage was limited to one empty stall and part of the hay storage area. Kieran quickly assessed the situation, moving the horses to safer stalls while Bethany soothed them with gentle words and touches. "We'll need to cover that hole before water ruins the hay," Kieran shouted over the storm's noise, pointing to where rain was already streaming in. Working together, they managed to stretch a tarp over the damaged section, securing it as best they could in the howling wind. By the time they finished, they were both soaked again and shivering with cold. "That will hold until morning," Kieran said, leading the way back to the cabin. Once inside, he stoked the fire while Bethany wrung water from her hair. "You should change again," he told her. "I'll make coffee to warm us up." When she returned in dry clothes, Kieran had coffee waiting and had changed his own wet shirt. They sat before the fire, cradling their cups, listening to the storm rage outside. "Thank you for helping," he said after a while. "Most women I know would have stayed inside." "I'm not most women," Bethany replied, then winced at how prideful that sounded, but Kieran merely nodded. "No, you're not." There was something in his voice, admiration, perhaps, that made her look up and meet his gaze. "Is that a good thing?" she asked hesitantly. "I think so," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've known plenty of people who talk about strength, but few who actually show it the way you have." Bethany looked away, uncomfortable with his praise. "It wasn't strength that got me through these past years, Kieran. It was survival. Isn't that the purest kind of strength? Continuing on when it would be easier to give up." His words penetrated a layer of shame. Bethany hadn't fully acknowledged the feeling that she had somehow failed by not making her marriage work, by not being the wife Thomas wanted. "My husband," she faltered, then steadied herself. "Thomas always said I was stubborn and difficult, that if I were more agreeable, more like other wives, we would have been happy." Kieran's expression darkened. "Some men mistake having a spine for being difficult. They don't want a partner, they want a reflection. The simple truth of his statement struck Bethany with force. She had spent years trying to contort herself into the shape Thomas demanded, only to be told repeatedly that she wasn't trying hard enough. "How did you get so wise about marriage, Mr. Pratt?" she asked, attempting lightness. "Not from experience," he admitted with a faint smile. "But I watched my parents. They disagreed plenty, argued sometimes, but there was always respect beneath it. My father valued my mother's opinion even when it differed from his own." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "A man who truly loves a woman doesn't try to make her smaller." The tears came suddenly, catching Bethany by surprise. She turned away, embarrassed by her reaction. Kieran made no move to comfort her physically, seeming to understand her need for space. Instead, he simply continued talking, his steady voice a balm to her raw emotions. "When Emma and I first came here, she was so homesick I thought she might leave, but she stuck it out because she believed in what we were building. Her strength wasn't in never feeling fear or sadness, it was in facing those feelings and continuing anyway." Gradually, Bethany's tears subsided. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her eyes. "You must think me terribly emotional." "I think you're human," he corrected gently, "and humans feel things." They sat in silence after that, the storm's fury gradually lessening outside until Kieran finally stood. "We should try to get some sleep. Morning will come early and we'll have repairs to make." Bethany nodded, suddenly exhausted. "Good night, Kieran, and thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me," she said simply. Understanding flickered in his eyes. "Good night, Bethany." The morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having spent its fury overnight. The damage was less severe than they'd feared. The fallen tree had damaged only a small section of the barn roof, which Kieran set about repairing while Bethany tended to the animals and cleaned up debris around the yard. Emma returned that afternoon, full of stories about the new baby and concern about the storm damage. Life resumed its normal rhythm, but something had shifted between Bethany and Kieran. There was an awareness now, a careful attention to each other's presence that hadn't existed before. Weeks passed, summer turning gradually toward fall. Bethany's confidence grew with each new skill she mastered. She learned to ride one of the gentler horses, to bake bread in the temperamental oven, and even to help with basic cattle handling during a small roundup. One crisp September evening, Kieran suggested they ride to the ridge overlooking the property. "The sunset's particularly fine from there," he explained. Emma gave Bethany a knowing look, but said nothing as they prepared to depart. The ride was peaceful, the landscape painted in the golden hues of late afternoon. When they reached the ridge, Kieran helped Bethany dismount, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary at her waist. "It's beautiful," Bethany said, gazing out over the land that had become her home. "This was the spot where I decided to buy this land," Kieran told her, standing close beside her. "I rode out with the previous owner, saw the view, and knew this was where I wanted to build my life." There was something in his voice that made Bethany turn to look at him. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. "Bethany," he said quietly, "I'm not good with fancy words or grand gestures, but these past months with you here have shown me what was missing in my life before." Her heart began to race. "Kieran, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you came here running from pain, not looking for anything new, and if friendship is all you want to offer, I'll respect that completely." He took a deep breath. "But I find myself hoping for more. I've come to care for you deeply, and if you could see your way to considering a future together, it would make me the happiest man in Colorado territory." Bethany's mind whirled. Part of her wanted to retreat into the safety of solitude after all. She had been so wrong about Thomas. But Kieran wasn't Thomas, had never been anything like him. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, but of trusting my own judgment again." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I can understand that. I'm not asking for an answer today or even tomorrow, just for you to think about it. What if I'm not capable of being a proper wife?" The fear that had haunted her for years spilled out. "Thomas always said I was lacking." "Thomas was a fool," Kieran interrupted, unusual heat in his voice. "You are the strongest, most capable woman I've ever known, besides my sister. Any man would be blessed to have you as his partner." The sincerity in his eyes broke something loose in Bethany's heart, a fear she had carried for too long. "I don't need more time," she said softly. "I've known how I felt about you for weeks, but I was afraid to acknowledge it." Hope bloomed in Kieran's expression. "And how do you feel?" "Like I've found a home I never want to leave," she said simply. "Like I've found someone who sees me as I am and values me for it." Kieran stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "May I kiss you, Bethany?" At her nod, he leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a tender kiss that held promise rather than demand. When they parted, Bethany felt a sense of rightness she had never experienced with Thomas. "We should head back before dark," Kieran said, though he seemed reluctant to move away from her. As they rode home together, the setting sun painting the landscape in rich golds and purples, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had left the courthouse in tears, her life in shambles. Now she rode toward a future bright with possibility, her heart full of a love she had never thought to find again. Emma was waiting on the porch when they returned, one look at their faces telling her all she needed to know. Her smile was radiant as she embraced Bethany. "Welcome to the family," she whispered. "For real this time." 3 months later, Bethany stood beside Kieran in the small church in the nearest town, exchanging vows that felt entirely different from those she had spoken to Thomas 6 years earlier. These were promises made with clear eyes and an open heart, to a man who had proven his character through daily actions rather than empty words. Their wedding was small but joyful, with Emma as Bethany's attendant and a handful of neighboring ranchers as witnesses. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from tree branches. As evening fell, Kieran found Bethany sitting alone for a moment, watching their guests dance to fiddle music under the stars. "Any regrets, Mrs. Pratt?" he asked, sitting beside her. Bethany smiled, covering his hand with hers. "Not a single one. Not even about how we met. It wasn't exactly conventional, especially not about that," she said firmly. "That day at the courthouse felt like the end of everything. I couldn't see how anything good could possibly come from such pain." Kieran squeezed her hand. "And now I know that endings can also be beginnings," she said softly. "That sometimes when everything seems lost, you're actually being set free." As they rejoined their guests, Bethany caught sight of Emma dancing with one of the neighboring ranchers, laughing as he twirled her around the makeshift dance floor. Life at the ranch would change with their marriage, but they would face those changes together as a family. Later that night, as Bethany and Kieran stood on the porch of the cabin that was now truly their home, she remembered the moment he had ridden up to her on the courthouse steps, offering not just shelter but dignity when she needed it most. "Thank you," she said, turning in his embrace to face him. "For what?" he asked, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "For asking me to come home with you that day," she replied. "For seeing someone worth saving when I couldn't see it myself." Kieran shook his head slightly. "I didn't save you, Bethany, you saved yourself. I just offered a place for you to stand while you did it." In that moment, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that the tears she had shed outside that courthouse had led her not to an ending, but to the beginning of the life she was always meant to live, one of purpose, dignity, and love that strengthened rather than diminished her spirit.